Every piece at this point starts with a commission. I don't really write anything just for fun at this point, and haven't for a long time. And that's primarily because I just am busy enough with the commissions, and they're very emotionally taxing and just intellectually taxing. And by the time I'm done with them, I'm just fried. And so then I will take several weeks or longer off in between pieces. I'm not one of those composers who writes every day no matter what. I work on the piece every day while I'm writing it, but when it's done, I don't write. I need a break to do other things and just kind of decompress and reset and get new ideas and think about what the next piece will be. Once I know what the commission is, or that commission, I get the commission, but I don't write it then. I'm generally booked out about 2 years in advance. And so once I get the commission, eventually that piece rolls around, like 18 months later is when I really start writing it. The process depends on how difficult the piece is going to be, if it has something to do with a request from the commissioning ensemble or director or whatever to make it about whether it's a closer or an opener, or they want a ballad, or they want, they tell me what the length is. And then those things all go into play with determining what the piece will be. I figure out what the structure will be before I write the piece. In general, I want the structure ahead of time. Otherwise, I just sit there and I'm just kind of making stuff up and noodling and hoping I get the right duration of music. But the structure is critical, especially the longer the piece is. If I'm writing a 3-minute piece, I can generally just kind of sit down and over the course of a few weeks write a 3-minute piece. But if you're writing a 7 or 10 or 30-minute piece, I need to know before I put a single note down what the whole shape is going to be. Something I learned from John Corigliano in grad school. He says if you're a composer, you should think like an architect. You should think about if you're an architect and you're going to make a building, you don't start by picking out a really cool lamp. That's the last thing you do. What you do is you're like, what's the purpose of this building? How big does it need to be to meet that purpose? What's it made of to support that size of structure? Are there steel beams involved? Things like that. And then you do the building, and then the last thing you do is you're picking out the furniture. He's like, the notes are the furniture. So figure out what the whole piece is for before you ever do any of the notes. And so I try to do that and get a really clear idea, at least of what, maybe what the title is, at least with what I'm trying to do in the piece. And then I just think about that, often for a couple of weeks before any notes even come. The notes themselves, I don't have any idea where they come from. If the idea is good enough, with a structure or a title or something like that, the notes will just kind of end up in my head, and I don't know how that happens. But I definitely do have to take that time between the pieces, or the notes I get in my head are too closely related to the piece that I just finished. I think every piece that you write back to back, they're going to sound related. And I think it's okay if they sound like cousins, but if they sound like, brother and sister or something, or then it's too close. So I need that separation of time so that I get these ideas out of my head before I start to think about what a new tune might be or something. And generally, I do try to make the ideas for the pieces overall different enough that I'm not going to think of the same kind of melodic material for 2 different pieces that I write back to back, because I would not generally write like 2 concertos back to back or 2 middle school pieces back to back. I try to do like maybe a middle school piece, and then a large collegiate level piece, and then maybe a chamber piece or something, just to completely change my palette before resetting and doing another band piece. Figuring out the instrumentation, often if it's going to be something weird, I will know that before I start the piece often, so that I'm thinking of melodic material that works well with that. Like I have a piece called The Frozen Cathedral that has bass flute and alto flute and a lot of surround percussion to make it sound like the audience is surrounded by like twinkling, snow, basically, or ice. And that I knew before I started writing the piece. Like, I'm going to use these instruments, so it's come up with a tune that works well on bass flute. And then if you're going to write something for bass flute, which is really the quietest acoustic instrument there is. It's barely louder than an air conditioner in the room. You need to score the chords with it in a really careful way to make it so that you can hear the bass flute. It's an instrument so quiet that you really need to lean in as an audience member to hear it. And I thought that was a really cool way to approach the overall idea of the piece. Make it so quiet at the beginning that you have to lean in, and then by the end, I have the surround percussion playing as loudly as they possibly can, and all the brass is playing triple forte and sustained chords and chorale things, and I thought it would be really fun to just explore how massive of a dynamic range you could have in a single piece, and basically have it arch from barely audible to deafeningly loud. Because either of those would be boring, I think. A piece that's just loud or just quiet is not all that exciting. It's like having that push and pull of dynamics and harmony and things that's fun. I have a piece called Lightning Field that Pepper sells, and that one, the idea for the piece came originally from one instrument that I got as a gag gift from a friend of mine named David Rakowski, who's a composer. And every year he gets me some really silly gift. A couple years ago, he got me a thunder tube, which I'd never seen before, but it's basically a tube this big that's made of cardboard and has a spring hanging off the bottom, and you shake it and it sounds like thunder. And Remo Percussion made these things, probably with like throwaway materials, and I got it out of the box and the spring made this crazy noise and the cat freaked out, and I was like, oh, there's a piece there. And so I wrote this piece, Lightning Field, around the idea of having this handheld thunder that you could do. And I decided to put the players around the audience because I hadn't seen a high school piece that used antiphonal percussion like that, or middle school, high school piece. So I thought it'd be fun to surround the audience with these instruments that are just kind of throwaway, $7 things. And the whole piece came from just one silly little instrument. And sometimes that's like the genesis for a whole thing.